The year was 1944. In a battered village on the edge of Normandy, the war had left its fingerprints everywhere. Rubble-strewn streets, smoke-stained rooftops, and the faint metallic scent of fear hanging in the air. The Allies had pushed inland, but the German 15th Army held a line that refused to bend. For weeks, conventional assaults had ground to a halt. Every attempt to move forward had been met with precise artillery, machine gun nests, and the cold, calculating eye of seasoned officers. But in a shadowed barn just outside the village, a very different kind of war was being conceived. Inside, a ragtag group of men and women moved quietly, each carrying a piece of a puzzle that, if assembled correctly, might change the course of a battle without firing a single bullet. Artists sketched tanks, stagehands measured distances with tape, and sound engineers loaded reels of pre-recorded artillery, gunfire, and marching boots into battered gramophones. There were painters mixing camouflage, carpenters shaping wood into the illusion of turreted tanks, and electricians rigging flickering lights to mimic the flash of muzzle fire. Captain Jonathan Hayes, former theater director turned officer, paced the barn floor, his hands clasped behind his back. Every plan they had tested had relied on precision, timing, and a touch of imagination. "Remember," he said, his voice low but sharp, "the Germans will only fight what they see. If they hear and see something that isn't there, it's theirs to fear." The team called themselves Phantom Brigade, a name whispered more in awe than jest. They weren't soldiers in the conventional sense. They were actors, pranksters, and misfits drafted from the world of creativity. But war had a way of bending unlikely hands into deadly precision. Each member carried a nervous excitement, the same tremor that dancers feel before a debut performance. Only here, the stakes were death. Outside, the air was crisp with the smell of earth and rain-soaked straw. In the distance, German sentries patrolled, oblivious to the quiet revolution brewing in the barn. For days, the Phantom Brigade had studied maps, intercepted radio chatter, and noted the precise rotations of enemy patrols. They knew the men on the other side were seasoned, suspicious, and ruthless, and yet that knowledge only sharpened their resolve. "We don't need to fight them," muttered Sergeant Daniel Roth, former stagehand, as he arranged the first inflatable Sherman tank in the muddy field beyond the barn. The tank, at first glance, was absurd. Canvas stretched over wooden frames, with paint and netting applied to mimic the dull sheen of steel. But from the air, from a distance, it was terrifyingly real. Around it, smaller decoys, fake artillery pieces, and camouflaged silhouettes of soldiers were positioned with obsessive care. Gramophones hidden behind the barns and hedgerows crackled to life at timed intervals. The rumble of tanks, the sharp staccato of rifle fire, and the ominous boom of distant explosions. At twilight, Captain Hayes stood on a slight rise, watching as shadows stretched across the field. "In 5 minutes," he said, "we give them the first taste. Listen to them believe." From across the forested ridge, a German patrol moved with disciplined caution. They had been reporting strange sightings, distant sounds, and phantom movements for days, reports the officers dismissed as miscommunication. But tonight, the night was different. The first reel played, a symphony of battle. The ground seemed alive, shaking lightly with cleverly concealed pneumatic devices under the soil. A distant drumbeat of marching boots made it sound like an entire division was advancing. The Germans paused. They huddled, eyes scanning the field that to them was suddenly alive with preparation for attack. Their commanders debated via crackling radios, but the voices carried uncertainty. Could an entire armored division have been moved overnight? The tension stretched taut. Their eyes darted toward the silhouetted shapes. Tanks, artillery, men? Impossible to be certain in the dim gray half-light.
Captain Hayes exhaled slowly. His heart pounded in time with the rumble of the fake engines. Every member of the Phantom Brigade held their breath. This wasn't just a trick. This was psychological warfare distilled to its purest form. If the Germans took the bait, an entire line could fall without a single Allied bullet fired. And then, maybe, lives could be saved. Somewhere inside the enemy camp, the rumor began. A Phantom army had appeared overnight, moving, shifting, preparing for attack. Orders came down quickly. Artillery units repositioned. Patrols doubled back. Fear, subtle but sharp, began to shape their decisions. And all of it, the panic, the tension, the unseen movements, was the product of human imagination, ingenuity, and audacity. In the dim light of the barn, Hayes whispered, almost to himself, "History doesn't just remember the battles fought, it remembers the clever ones." Night fell over the Normandy fields like a blanket of silence, pierced only by the faint hum of the Phantom Brigade's devices. The wind carried whispers of movement across the muddy terrain. Inflatable tanks, carefully painted and positioned, swayed slightly in the breeze, as though breathing. The crew had spent hours perfecting their placements, ensuring that no perspective from the enemy lines could betray their ruse. Every shadow was calculated, every flicker of light deliberate. Inside the barn, Sergeant Roth adjusted a hidden speaker, testing the reel of pre-recorded tank engines. The vibrations in the wet soil were subtle but convincing. "Listen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll hear it over the ridge. One engine rumble, one artillery boom, and they'll think half a division is moving." Lieutenant Clara Benson, a former sound engineer with nerves as precise as her tuning tools, monitored the synchronization. "If we stagger the sounds, they won't know what's real and what's not. Confusion is our ally." She ran her hands over the spools of tape, ensuring the cadence of marching boots, gunfire, and artillery barrages matched the illusion outside. Every element had to feel live, dynamic, chaotic. Meanwhile, across the ridge, German officers pored over reports and maps, unaware that their intelligence had been subtly manipulated for days. Rumors of movements they couldn't see, reports of phantom columns appearing overnight, and vague hints of artillery placements in the fog began to sow doubt. The meticulous design of the Phantom Brigade worked invisibly, like a predator circling its prey. Back in the barn, Hayes moved quietly among his team. Every gesture, every whispered instruction carried weight. "Remember," he said, "perfection isn't the goal. They can't be certain. Our strength is in ambiguity." His eyes swept across the field, taking in the swaying shapes, the distant glimmer of lights rigged to mimic muzzle flashes, and the faint mist rising from the earth, carefully sprayed to simulate the dust of troop movements. Hours passed, the sounds intensified. The illusion became a living thing. From their vantage point, the Germans could see nothing definite, only movement in the shadows, the faint outline of armored vehicles, and the distant rumble of an army preparing for war. Conflicting radio chatter added to their unease. Orders contradicted each other. Reports of unseen units moving through the woods were dismissed and then reluctantly acknowledged as credible when paired with the visual hints. In the barn, the Phantom Brigade held their breaths. Every reel played, every engine hum timed perfectly. They weren't soldiers, but actors in the grandest play of their lives. And the audience, unknowingly, was one of the most formidable armies in Europe. Hayes scribbled notes. Observation. Fear spreads faster than bullets. One visual, one sound, and it can control decisions. Then, a breakthrough. From the German lines, movement. Not a cautious patrol, but a full repositioning. Tanks were shifted, infantry redeployed, artillery withdrawn from their forward positions. The Germans had taken the bait. The illusion, nothing more than wood, canvas, tape, and human ingenuity, had forced a reaction. Hayes's heart raced, a mixture of elation and fear. One mistake now could ruin weeks of planning, but for the first time, he allowed himself a quiet smile.
Roth whispered, "They're moving back. They actually believe it." Clara nodded, eyes glued to the soundboards. "They can't see it's fake. They can't hear us from here. It's working." Outside, the field seemed calm again, but every shadow, every creaking inflatable, every hidden gramophone continued its subtle dance. The Germans, convinced they faced an advancing army, fortified themselves elsewhere, redeploying to cover sectors that didn't exist. Their decisions, dictated entirely by the illusion, saved lives on the Allied side and avoided a bloody frontal assault that would have cost hundreds. Hayes finally turned to the group. Tonight, we didn't fight with guns. We fought with imagination. And imagination wins wars more quietly than any artillery. For the first time, a young private, barely 18, allowed himself to imagine the full scale of what they had done. They hadn't just created a fake army. They had manufactured fear. And in war, fear was as lethal as any bullet. The Phantom Brigade returned to the barn as the first light of dawn tinted the horizon pink. Exhausted, muddy, but triumphant, they watched the enemy positions from a distance. No gunfire had been exchanged, no lives lost in their ranks, yet the Germans had already begun retreating, repositioning, and reassessing. The seed of doubt had taken root. And in that quiet, mist-covered field, Hayes understood the full weight of their creation. A battle fought not in the mud and blood of the front line, but in the mind. By the second night, the Germans were no longer certain what they faced. From their forward observation posts, the horizon was alive with movement that should not have existed. Tanks appeared where maps marked empty fields. Infantry seemed to march in perfect formation, yet vanished before any direct confrontation. Every patrol that tried to confirm the reports returned with fragmented, contradictory observations. Captain Mueller, a seasoned officer, slammed his fist on the table, maps and intelligence reports fluttering to the floor. "It makes no sense," he growled. 2 divisions? 3? There shouldn't be anyone here." His adjutant, trembling, whispered that local villagers had seen lights and heard artillery noises from the forest, but no one had crossed the roads. Mueller's face tightened. "Then it's a trap," he muttered. Across the barn, Hayes and Clara listened via their hidden field radios. Every snippet of German chatter that slipped through the static was another confirmation that the plan was working. Roth grinned. "They think we're everywhere." Clara adjusted the timing of artillery sounds, spacing the bursts to mimic distant bombardments. "They'll start overestimating us tonight," she said. Indeed, as darkness fell, the Germans deployed extra patrols into sectors that did not exist. They moved artillery to cover phantom approaches, leaving their real flanks vulnerable. Orders were repeated, misinterpreted, and repeated again. Fear compounded fear. Their seasoned corps, confident in experience and training, now wrestled with invisible enemies. Back at the Phantom Brigade's barn, young Private Ellis was shaking as he reloaded another tape. "Doesn't it feel wrong?" he asked. "We're tricking them with nothing but paint and sound." Hayes put a steady hand on his shoulder. "War is messy. Sometimes the deadliest weapon is what they think exists." As the night deepened, Roth sent a new wave of signals, radio chatter mimicking the coordination of a full division, moving as though advancing into the German right flank. Simultaneously, the inflatable tanks were shifted slightly under cover of fog, creating the illusion of rotation, redeployment, even tactical engagement. Each move, no matter how small, had been rehearsed weeks in advance. The Germans could not distinguish rehearsed illusion from real threat.
In their observation posts, German soldiers squinted into the fog, sweat clinging to brows. Orders came down from Mueller to withdraw to more defensible positions. "Do not engage unless necessary," he barked. Fear of ambush gripped them tighter than any actual enemy. Panic, invisible and silent, dictated their every movement. Inside the barn, Clara smiled faintly, though her hands never stopped moving over the soundboard. "They're reacting exactly how we predicted. Heart rates up, decisions slowed, errors multiplying." Hayes nodded, surveying the field outside. The moonlight revealed swaying silhouettes, punctuated by faint, convincing artillery flashes. "Every decision they make is ours," he whispered. "Every hesitation, every retreat, every misstep, a victory without a shot fired." Hours passed. The Phantom Brigade moved with disciplined precision, an orchestra of deception. The Germans' retreat accelerated. By morning,
The once formidable positions were largely abandoned, left to a ghost army that existed only in imagination, sound, and shadow. Hayes finally allowed himself a deep exhale. "They've been defeated," he murmured. "Not by bullets, not by bombs, but by doubt. Seeded carefully, nurtured skillfully, and harvested in silence." Roth, Clara, and the others looked out across the misty field. The retreating enemy had left their real positions vulnerable, unguarded, and ripe for strategic advantage. Ellis, staring at the horizon, shook his head in disbelief. We didn't fire a single shot?" Hayes placed a hand on his shoulder again. "Exactly. That's the point. Fear is louder than guns, uncertainty deadlier than artillery. And tonight, we've written history with nothing but imagination." The sun rose over the Normandy hills, casting long shadows over empty German trenches. Inflatable tanks sagged under dew. Artillery sounds no longer played, yet the Germans' minds remained trapped in the illusion. Victory had been earned before a single round was fired. And in that quiet aftermath, Hayes understood a fundamental truth. The most powerful armies are not always the ones with the largest guns, but the ones that can convince the enemy of their omnipresence. The morning after the Germans abandoned their fortified positions, the Phantom Brigade surveyed the field. Fog still lingered low over the hills, curling around the inflatable tanks like ghosts. No one fired a single shot, yet the devastation in the minds of their enemy was complete. Hayes walked among the remnants of their illusions, a deflated tank here, a scattered sound speaker there, and allowed himself a rare smile. "Quiet victories," Roth muttered, still half hidden behind a tarp, adjusting the positioning of a dummy artillery piece. Claire's hands hovered over the soundboard, now idle, as if even she feared breaking the spell by moving too quickly. Private Ellis wandered through the barn, staring at the fake tanks and listening to the empty radio channels. I still can't believe it," he admitted, voice low. "We tricked an entire corps with balloons and tapes?" Hayes rested a hand on his shoulder. "Not just balloons and tapes, with imagination, precision, and courage. And that's the hardest courage of all. To fight with nothing tangible, nothing real, and still win." Yet victory came with its cost. The men of the Phantom Brigade were haunted by the faces they'd never seen and the fear they had planted. It was one thing to train, to plan, to execute a mission in secrecy. It was another to manipulate human minds on the scale they had achieved. Roth's jaw tightened. "I can't stop imagining Captain Merler. The fear in his eyes. The doubt we planted. Did we break him? Did we cross a line?" Clara nodded slowly. She had been the architect of many of the illusions, the pre-recorded artillery, the phantom radio chatter, even the whispers of enemy voices. And now she wrestled with the ethics of it all. War is never clean, but this was different. No one died, yet we wielded power over lives and decisions in a way that feels unnatural. The officers of the Allied command arrived at the barn mid-morning, their vehicles crunching over frost-hardened dirt. Hayes reported the night operation, showing maps annotated with German positions, retreat paths, and the timing of each fake deployment. The generals nodded in quiet approval, impressed by the ingenuity and the precision.
100% success without casualties, one remarked. Not a single shot fired. You've demonstrated a new kind of warfare, psychological, indirect, and devastating. Hayes shrugged. "We didn't invent the idea," he said. "We just made it real, convincing enough for them to believe." But in private moments, the brigade members wrestled with the implications. Ellis, pacing along the barn's edge, finally voiced a thought they had all felt. Does it count as victory if the enemy never even sees it coming? If they're defeated by shadows? Hayes paused, looking out toward the horizon, where the fog lifted to reveal abandoned German fortifications. "It counts," he said softly. Because the result is the same. Lives were spared, positions gained, and momentum shifted. Fear is a weapon, just like a gun or a cannon, and tonight we mastered it. Still, the psychological weight was real. That night, as the brigade camped in the barn, sleep was uneasy. Dreams were filled with ghostly tanks advancing silently, phantom artillery shells landing with invisible impact. The men woke startled, hearts racing. The thin line between illusion and reality blurred. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence scrambled to verify the German retreat. Reports were chaotic. Enemy retreat confirmed, positions abandoned, no engagement recorded, morale appears shaken. The reports could not account for the real reason. The deception had been so complete that even seasoned reconnaissance officers were fooled. Clara, alone in the barn, stared at the dormant soundboard. "History will call it clever," she murmured, "but we lived it. We were the shadows they couldn't fight. And tomorrow, someone else might have to do it again." Hayes joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. That's the way wars are won. Not always with bravery on the front lines, but with discipline, preparation, and the courage to make the enemy fear what isn't there. By dawn, the Phantom Brigade packed their equipment, leaving behind the field littered with deflated tanks and silent speakers. The Germans had abandoned their lines, but the memory of the night's deception would linger longer than any physical scar. The brigade moved on, ghosts themselves, leaving only shadows and doubt in their wake. By mid-morning, news of the German retreat had begun to trickle through Allied command. Maps were redrawn, reinforcements reallocated, and an air of cautious optimism settled over the front lines. Hayes and the Phantom Brigade had expected recognition, but not this scale of confusion. In the German command posts, officers pored over reports that made no sense. Entire positions abandoned without engagement, units reporting phantom artillery, radio chatter indicating attacks that never occurred. Colonel Mueller's eyes were weary, scanning telegrams and reports as if he could see through the fog and find reality. But it was gone. The Allies had created a reality that existed only in perception, and it had broken the rhythm of German command. On the ground, German troops were jittery. Patrols reported hearing tanks where none existed, artillery fire in empty fields, and distant shouts that vanished when approached. Fear crept in like smoke through trenches. Units overreacted to phantom threats, firing into nothingness, wasting ammunition, and sending false reports back up the chain of command. The deception had multiplied, feeding itself, each fabricated encounter gaining credibility as more soldiers believed it real. Back in the Phantom Brigade's barn, the team listened to intercepted German communications. Clara leaned over the soundboard, adjusting frequencies to catch faint signals. "They're questioning everything," she said, her voice a mix of triumph and unease. Roth nodded grimly. "It's like we've become a virus, invisible, spreading doubt, weakening them from the inside."
Hayes traced the German movements on a chalkboard, showing how abandoned positions created gaps the Allies could exploit. "This isn't just one success," he said. "This is a domino effect. If we push here, reinforce here, the Germans will collapse under their own uncertainty." Ellis, leaning against a stack of crates, finally spoke. "So, the more they doubt, the more we win?" Hayes nodded. "Exactly. The enemy's mind becomes the battlefield, and we're already inside it." The psychological toll on the Phantom Brigade was not limited to the enemy. Each member felt a strange unease, knowing that every misstep, every exaggerated sound, every phantom tank contributed to fear and disorder. Victory had been achieved without bloodshed, yet the morality of it weighed heavily. Clara turned to Hayes. "We're puppeteers," she said quietly, "and the people on the other end, They don't even know we exist." Hayes didn't answer immediately. He understood. War demands results, but at the cost of innocence, trust, and clarity. Meanwhile, intelligence officers began documenting the strange events. Maps marked with ghost troop movements, radio logs full of contradictions, and reports of phantom attacks filled binders. Analysts struggled to reconcile the evidence with reality, and the more they analyzed, the more the Germans' confusion spread. Commanders second-guessed their own strategies, defensive lines were abandoned, and hesitation replaced decisiveness. At night, the Phantom Brigade moved quietly, resetting decoys, inflating tanks, and replaying pre-recorded artillery. Each sound, each movement was choreographed to perfection. The Germans never saw the men behind the curtain, only the illusion of a massive, omnipresent army. And as the brigade worked, the fog rolled in, swallowing hills, fields, and forests, making the deception complete. Some soldiers joked nervously. Ellis whispered, "It's like we're painting reality with shadows." Clara smiled faintly. "Shadows can kill too," she replied. Hayes, overseeing the operation, felt a shiver of satisfaction tempered by unease. They were winning, yes, but the war they waged was now in the minds of men, not in the soil or the trenches. The battlefield had changed, and its rules were unspoken and invisible. By the end of the week, the effect was undeniable. German troops had retreated further than expected, morale had plummeted, and commanders feared phantom attacks at every turn. Allied forces, guided by maps and intelligence shaped by the Phantom Brigade's illusions, seized strategic points with minimal resistance. Hayes knew that this success, while brilliant, came with a warning. Once the enemy discovered the truth, the game would shift. The trickery could not last forever, and reliance on illusion carried its own dangers. Yet for now, the Phantom Brigade had done what no conventional force could. They had rewritten the rules of engagement, demonstrating that fear, perception, and deception could achieve what guns and bombs could not. And as the brigade retreated to their barn, exhausted and weary, the brigade understood that history would remember this operation not for its bloodshed, but for its ingenuity and its haunting efficiency. The Phantom Brigade's barn was quiet, lit only by the flickering lanterns and the soft hum of equipment. Yet inside, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The men and women who had turned soundboards, canvas, and inflatables into weapons now felt the creeping weight of what they had unleashed. Clara adjusted to playback of a recorded artillery barrage, her hands trembling slightly. The sounds of explosions, shouting, and orders replayed through speakers hidden in the hills beyond the front. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like for them?" she asked softly, almost to herself. Roth, tightening the valves on a decoy tank, paused. "Every day," he admitted. "We're ghosts, yes, but ghosts that terrify." Hayes paced the length of the barn. He knew this operation was working, too well. Reports showed the Germans abandoning fortified positions, retreating into forests, and mistrusting their own eyes. Victory, however, had never felt so hollow. The brigade had mastered the art of illusion, yet the human cost was invisible but undeniable. "We're playing with minds," Hayes said, voice heavily, "and minds aren't machines. We can't control what panic or fear will do once it's planted." Ellis, leaning against a crate, cracked a nervous smile. "You think too much, Hayes. We saved lives, didn't we? No one had to die for this victory." Hayes shook his head. "And yet, fear is still a weapon. Every time a German soldier hears a phantom tank or a fake squad, his heart races. He may survive today, but the memory, the paranoia, that lasts." Outside, the fog rolled in thick, curling around hills and trees like fingers. The brigade had chosen this night for a major escalation, a network of decoys, more elaborate sounds, and carefully timed radio chatter meant to convince the Germans that the Allies were ready to strike in force. Each member knew their role perfectly. Every click, hiss, and hum had been rehearsed countless times.
But as the operation began, tension tightened. The artificial explosions echoed through the fog, distant voices shouted orders, and the decoy tanks seemed to lumber across the hills. Yet, the team noticed a change in themselves. Roth flinched at a simulated blast, and Clara's hands lingered over the controls longer than necessary. The line between illusion and reality had blurred. Hours passed. Radio intercepts indicated German units were abandoning positions, some in panic, others in cautious retreat. The brigade had achieved what they never could have with rifles or artillery. The illusion had teeth. But Hayes sensed the shift. He saw fear in his team. A fear not of the Germans, but of the power they wielded invisibly. They were no longer just deceivers. They were arbiters of terror. Clara finally broke the silence. "Do we cross a line?" she whispered. "We're not fighting them in battle, but we're still breaking them." Hayes stopped pacing. He looked at each member of the team, the stagehands, artists, engineers, and sound designers who had been drafted into this quiet war. War is full of lines. Some you see, some you don't. We chose this one because it saves lives in the end. But yes, it weighs on the soul. The night wore on, and the brigade executed their final maneuvers. Inflatable tanks glimmered faintly in the fog, speakers carried simulated gunfire, and phantom radio chatter filled the night. The Germans, isolated and unsure, abandoned yet another fortified position without a fight. Hayes knew this would be reported as a retreat due to overwhelming force, not realizing it was orchestrated by a handful of men hidden in a barn miles away. As dawn broke, the fog lifted, revealing a landscape empty of German troops. The brigade stepped outside, exhausted, faces pale from hours of tension and focus. Victory had been earned, yes, but at what cost? The thrill of success was tempered by the quiet knowledge that their enemy had been terrorized, if only by sound and shadow. Ellis broke the silence with a soft laugh, almost nervously. "Well, I guess ghosts can hide, after all." Clara didn't laugh. Roth didn't smile. Hayes didn't answer. The battlefield had changed, the rules rewritten, and the shadows they'd cast were as real as any bullet or shell. And somewhere, in the distance, the Germans would continue to march, haunted by phantoms, unsure if what they faced had ever been real. The morning after the final deception, the battlefield lay quiet, mist curling over abandoned trenches and empty foxholes. No smoke rose, no artillery roared, yet the land bore the invisible scars of fear. Hayes, Clara, Roth, and the rest of the Phantom Brigade stood at the edge of the field, surveying the result of nights spent in darkness, creating phantoms that moved men without firing a single shot. Reports arrived in the barn by courier. German units had retreated miles beyond fortified positions. Communications intercepted suggested confusion, mistrust, and even panic among the ranks. The legend of the Ghost Army was born overnight. Hayes read aloud from one dispatch, voice quiet, heavy with irony. Enemy reports indicate large armored units where none exist, retreating from positions previously considered secure. The brigade exchanged looks, a mixture of pride, relief, and something darker, an unspoken understanding that war had been altered not by bullets, but by illusion. Ross let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We did it," he said, though the words sounded hollow. "We did it. They ran because of us."
Clara's gaze lingered on the empty horizon. "And what happens now?" she asked. "We've won battles without a fight, but we've manipulated lives." Hayes didn't answer immediately. He thought of every German soldier who had trembled at the sound of phantom tanks, of fake radio orders, of the shadows that only existed because they believed. Hayes finally spoke. "War isn't clean. It never was. Today we proved that strategy can be invisible, that fear can be as powerful as fire, but that doesn't make it easy to bear." The days that followed were a blur. Orders came to expand the Phantom Brigade's operations.
to replicate the inflatable tanks, the pre-recorded sounds, the fake radio chatter across multiple fronts. Artists, engineers, and sound technicians became soldiers overnight, their craft weaponized into a tool of deception. Field commanders marveled at their results. Entire corps had abandoned fortified lines, entire plans disrupted, without a single Allied life lost in combat. Yet internally, the brigade struggled. Some members reveled in the ingenuity, the proof that intellect and creativity could shape war. Others wrestled with guilt, nightmares of imagined deaths and panicked soldiers haunting them. Clara confided in Hayes one evening, "I can't stop thinking about them, about what we made them feel, the terror, the confusion." Hayes put a hand on her shoulder. "And that's why we remember, Clara. Not to forget, but to stay human. We saved lives, yes, but yes, we weighed them too." As the war progressed, the legend of the Phantom Army grew. Allies used the tactic sparingly, always careful to balance deception with ethics. Generals praised the brigade's ingenuity. Historians later would note its brilliance. German commanders, meanwhile, could never fully explain their retreats, haunted by an enemy that seemed omnipresent, intangible, and impossible to fight. Years later, Hayes returned to the barn that had once been their headquarters. Dust lay thick on crates, the lanterns long extinguished, but echoes of the brigade's laughter, fear, and purpose seemed to linger in the air. The Phantom tanks had been dismantled, the speakers stored or repurposed, yet he could still hear the hum of the night operations in his memory. Clara and Roth joined him quietly, older, marked by the weight of their experience. "We did something remarkable," Roth said softly. Hayes nodded, eyes scanning the empty floor. "We changed the rules of war, without killing, without firing. And yet, we carry the ghosts of those we deceived with us forever." The story of the Phantom Army remained classified for decades, whispered only among the few who had orchestrated it. Its legend lived on in military strategy schools, in the study of psychological warfare, and in the memory of those who knew the truth that an army of sound, shadows, and illusion could hold power as real as any bullet or shell. And somewhere in the fog of distant hills, the German soldiers who had fled never knew exactly what had faced them, only that an invisible army, a cunning ruse, and the creativity of a handful of brave, desperate souls had made them retreat. Hayes stepped outside into the morning light. The battlefield was quiet. The war would rage on elsewhere, but here, for this moment, the Phantom Brigade had won. Not with bullets, but with ingenuity, deception, and courage. And though the world would never fully know their story, Hayes knew one truth. History had been shaped not by the strongest, but by the cleverest. And sometimes by the invisible. The sun rose, the mist lifted, and the shadows of the Phantom Army faded into legend.